If you're switching to Valvoline, don't ignore the boring stuff, because the boring stuff is usually what decides whether the switch feels like a win or a mess. People swap oils and then get surprised by three things. The engine suddenly sounds different on cold starts, the dipstick starts dropping faster or slower than before, and then somebody says, better change that filter early or you'll clog it. And now you're second guessing the whole decision. Before getting too far, let's keep it simple. What Valvoline says this oil is supposed to do, why the car community argues about it so much, and what's actually smart for a high-mileage daily driver that just needs to start every morning and not drink oil. First, Valvoline isn't some random off-brand situation. It's mainstream, it's everywhere, and most of their current oils are built around the same baseline expectations the whole industry works under, meeting API and ILSAC standards. If you're buying something that's API SP and ILSAC GF6 or whatever your manual calls for, you're already in the zone where the oil has to pass a whole set of standardized engine tests for wear control, deposits, sludge, oxidation, and more. That matters because a lot of the internet fighting sounds like this oil is magic versus that oil is trash. And the truth is most licensed oils have to clear some pretty real hurdles just to be on the shelf. Now, where Valvoline gets people's attention is how hard they lean into cleaning and deposit control in their marketing, especially on high mileage stuff like Max Life and on newer Restore style products. Valvoline's own product pages and descriptions talk about things like extra detergents for sludge and deposits, seal conditioners meant to help with leaks, and wear protection claims. Their Restore and Protect line, for example, straight up says up to 100% piston deposit removal when used as directed for 4 or more consecutive oil changes at normal intervals, and they tie that claim to an adapted sequence of their age-style deposit test context. That's a real, recognized type of test framework used in modern oil specs to evaluate things like high-temperature oxidation and piston deposits, but it's still a test, not your exact engine living your exact life. And here's the thing. Deposits are not just a cosmetic problem. For high-mileage daily drivers, deposits are one of the sneaky reasons oil consumption can creep up without obvious smoke clouds. When people talk about ring sticking, they're usually talking about carbon and varnish building up around the piston rings so they don't move and seal as freely as they should. That can let more oil slip past, and it can also mess with compression. So when an oil brand sells the idea of cleaning piston deposits over multiple normal oil changes, that is aimed right at the complaint so many owners have. My car runs fine, but it's using oil. But that's only layer 1, what the brand claims. Layer 2 is what people argue about, and this is where it gets spicy. There are basically 2 camps you'll run into on Bob is the Oil Guy forum threads and in comment sections under mechanic-style automotive YouTube channels. One side says, a strong detergent package is good, keep the engine cleaner, might help consumption if rings are sticky. The other side says, if you clean too aggressively, you'll knock junk loose, clog the filter, and maybe even create leaks. Real talk. Both sides are reacting to something that can happen, but they're often talking past each other. The big missing detail is the maintenance history of the engine you're putting this oil into. If your engine has been on decent intervals for most of its life, and it's not full of thick sludge, switching to a modern API SP GF6 oil from Valvoline is usually uneventful. You might hear a slight change in startup sound, you might see the oil level behave a little differently, but it's rarely dramatic. People who do regular 5,000-mile changes, use a decent filter, and don't run the oil into the ground typically don't have some giant cleaning event waiting to happen. If your engine's history is unknown, or it had long intervals, cheap filters, lots of short trips, and you suspect it's dirty inside, that's where the filter anxiety conversation starts to make more sense. Not because Valvoline is too strong in some scary way, but because any fresh oil with a solid detergent system can start dissolving and suspending stuff that was happily stuck to surfaces. Over time, that material ends up in the filter. Filters are made to hold contaminants, so that's literally their job, but capacity is not infinite. Hang on to that for a second because this is where the early filter change debate gets misunderstood. Before we get there, let's talk about the other thing people notice right after an oil switch, cold start noise. Somebody switches brands and suddenly they swear their lifters tick for 2 seconds longer, or the engine sounds rough for the first minute, or the opposite happens and it goes quieter. That doesn't automatically mean the oil is better or worse. Cold start behavior is a mix of viscosity grade, base oil behavior, and additive chemistry, plus the engine's own design. And if you change viscosity, like going from 5W30 to 0W20, because a buddy told you it's more modern, you just changed how fast the oil flows cold and what it feels like hot. That can change sound. So the first don't ignore this item is simple. Match what the engine actually calls for. Same viscosity grade the manual specifies, and the right spec. A lot of Valvoline products carry the modern API Starburst and GF6 labeling on the bottle, and retailer listings echo those specs, but your car doesn't care what the front label says. It cares about viscosity and approvals. If your engine calls for Dexos or a specific European approval, you need the Valvoline product that matches that, not just any Valvoline bottle you grab because it was on sale. Now, back to oil consumption, because that's usually why people are tempted by high mileage and restore claims. Valvoline's high mileage products like Max Life are positioned around seal conditioners and extra detergents. Retailer descriptions often mention helping with leaks and fighting sludge and deposits, and Valvoline's own descriptions talk about restoring seal flexibility and reducing leaks. That sounds great, but you want to set expectations correctly. Seal conditioners can help if your leak is coming from hardened, shrunken seals that respond to conditioning. They won't fix a torn seal. They won't fix a groove worn into a crank surface. They won't fix a valve cover gasket that's baked flat and cracked. Sometimes they help a little, sometimes not at all. That's why you'll see mixed stories on forums. One person says it's slow to seep, another says nothing changed. Both can be true, and the deposit angle is similar. Cleaning is usually gradual when you're talking about motor oil doing normal oil change intervals. Valvoline's restore and protect messaging even leans into that timeline by saying 4 or more consecutive oil changes for the big up to deposit removal claim. That's not a one-week miracle. That's a long, boring, keep doing maintenance thing. And that's actually the part that gets missed. People switch oils, drive 300 miles, and expect the dipstick behavior to reset like a phone restart. Engines don't work like that. Okay, now the filter debate payoff. If you've been maintaining the engine well, to change the filter early because the oil is cleaning fear is usually overblown. The oil is always cleaning to some degree. Modern standards like API-SP and ILSAC GF6 include deposit and oxidation testing, and the Sequence Authority framework is specifically about handling high-temperature stress in deposits. Oils are designed to keep contaminants suspended so they can be caught by the filter and drained out at the interval. For a reasonably clean engine, your filter should not suddenly pack up and die because you switched to Valvoline. But if you suspect the engine is dirty or you bought the vehicle with unknown history, doing an early filter change can be a practical move, not a panic move. It's basically cheap insurance. You don't have to drain the oil early if you don't want to. Some people swap the filter halfway through the interval and top off what you lose. Some people just run a shorter first interval in the new oil, like 3,000 miles instead of 5,000, then go back to normal. That's not because the oil is dangerous, it's because you're managing uncertainty. And this is why people argue. One person is talking about a well-maintained Camry of 40K that's been loved. The other is talking about a neglected SUV at 180K that did 12,000-mile changes and short trips for years. Same oil brand, totally different risk picture. Let me ask you something, because I'm genuinely curious and it helps everybody reading. If you've switched to Valvoline on a high-mileage engine, what did it do to your oil level and startup noise? Like give the real details, vehicle engine mileage, your oil change interval, and what filter you ran. Was it a Wix, Fram Ultra, OEM, whatever? And did you change the filter early or just run a normal interval? Now, the next don't ignore this item is how you judge oil consumption after the switch. People will pour in a new oil, check the dipstick once, and then panic 2 weeks later because it looks lower. Consumption is best judged the boring way. Check on the same flat spot, same time of day, same warm or cool routine, and track it over a full interval. And if consumption changes after a switch, don't instantly assume the oil is thinner or the oil is burning. Sometimes a new oil can clean ring deposits slowly, and during that period you can see weird behavior. You might see consumption improve over a couple of normal intervals, or you might see it stay the same because the real issue is valve seals or a PCV problem. That'll matter in a minute, because the PCV system is the silent partner in a lot of oil consumption stories. A stuck or restricted PCV valve, or a poorly designed separator on some engines, can pull oil mist into the intake. People blame the oil brand, but the engine is basically vacuuming oil. If you switch to a different oil and consumption changes a bit, you still want to consider whether the PCV system is functioning right. That's not a Valvoline thing. That's an engine maintenance thing. Now let's talk about the cleaning causes leaks fear, because you're going to hear it. The story goes, I switched to a high detergent oil, and suddenly I'm leaking. What's usually happening is not that the oil created a leak out of nowhere. It's that the engine already had a weak seal or gasket, and deposits were masking it. Cleaner oil can remove some of that grime, and now you see the seep. That's annoying, but it's not the oil-harming metal. It's exposing the truth. And sometimes high-mileage formulations with seal conditioners can actually help slow a seep. But again, it depends on the failure mode. So where do we land on Valvoline specifically? Valvoline's brand story here is basically strong wear protection, strong deposit control, and targeted high-mileage features. Their product pages and retailer listings are consistent about those themes, and the API and ILSAC framework sets a baseline that keeps things honest. The community arguments are real, but they're often missing context. And the final piece, the part you shouldn't ignore, is that switching oils doesn't replace a maintenance plan. If your daily driver is high mileage and you're switching to Valvoline because you want a shot at lower consumption or better cleanliness over time, make the switch boring on purpose. Use the right viscosity and the right spec. Don't jump grades just because a bottle looks fancy. Pick a reasonable interval. If the engine is a known good citizen, run a normal interval and just monitor the dipstick. If the engine history is sketchy, either do a shorter first interval or swap the filter early once, calmly, and move on with your life. And here's the simple pick a side question, because I want to see where people actually land on this. Early filter change after switching to a cleaning-focused oil, yes or no? Now, I said the PCV point would matter in a minute. Here's why. If you switch to Valvoline and you're watching consumption like a hawk, you might assume any change is the oil's fault or the oil's success. But if your PCV valve is stuck, if your intake is oily, or if your engine is known for consumption because of ring design issues, the oil can only do so much. A deposit-focused oil might help if deposits are part of the problem. It won't fix a design flaw or a mechanical wear issue. That's not a knock on Valvoline. That's just reality. One more thing people don't talk about enough is top-off oil. High-mileage engines often need a little top-off between changes. If you're adding a quart here and there, you're also refreshing the additive package along the way. That can actually help keep things stable. The trap is mixing random viscosities and specs in panic mode. If you're running Valvoline 5W30 full synthetic, top off with the same viscosity and a compatible spec if you can. Consistency beats drama. Alright, second real world check-in, because this is the stuff that actually helps somebody decide what to do this weekend. If you've got a Valvoline story, good, bad, or nothing happened, drop the specifics. Make and model, engine, mileage, how long you ran it, what interval, and what filter brand. And if you switched from something else, say what you switched from. The before and after context is everything. So, the verdict that matches the title. If you're switching to Valvoline, don't ignore the maintenance history of the engine and don't ignore the filter conversation, but don't let it scare you into doing random stuff either. Valvoline's cleaning and deposit claims, especially on products that talk about piston deposits over multiple oil changes, are aimed at a real high mileage problem. Ring deposits that can drive consumption. The community arguments are mostly about engines with unknown or rough history, where any change can shake loose old habits. The practical move is to match the spec, monitor consumption and cold start behavior over a full interval, and choose an early filter change only if the engine's past gives you a reason to manage extra junk, not because you read one scary comment. The filter side of this story is a whole rabbit hole, and it's worth breaking down soon what good filter